what I'd like to do today is chat about the environment, sort of asked with Earth Day coming up to talk about environmental issues and sort of look at it from a holistic perspective and maybe some different angles on the environment. So kind of the way I approach it and the environment is that I often see it as it's talked about in a way that's sort of disconnected. It's something else, it's something over there. But the environment's connected to pretty much everything that we do, whether it's at home, at work, etc. So this is kind of the thesis for the talk, that the environment's connected to everything that we do. I teach this environmental sustainability class, and I thought I'd start with the topic of sustainability because it's so intertwined with the environment, and they a lot of times they get paired together. So the environment sustainability is it, and it's again something separate. But again, I think sustainability is something that's intertwines a whole bunch of issues. So just going back a little while, the United Nations Commission on Environment and Development, known as the Brundtland Commission, was in 1987, and it came out with this report looking at issues of population, development, and the impacts on the environment. And they came up with sort of the initial definition of sustainability or sustainable development. So it covers a couple of key things: the idea that we're meeting our needs as humans, but then that we're talking about a different time frame than we usually talk about. We're talking about across generations. So for us in the room, the amount of water we consume, if we consume all the water in the Bow River and my daughter has no access to water in 20, 30 years' time, that's not sustainable development. Other definitions that have come out that I think are worth looking at, just to again sort of reinforce the ideas. This professor from MIT, the possibility that human and other forms of life on Earth will flourish forever. So again, it's long time horizons. And this is really concise, enough for all forever. I think, again, it's the time frame and how long we talk about sustainability and to think about different generations is really key. Sustainability also gets talked about as something that you sit on. It's a three-legged stool, it's defined as sometimes. So there's three elements. There's social well-being, there's economic prosperity, and there's environmental health. So the reason that the three-legged stool analogy is used is that if a stool is designed that way and you're missing one leg, you'll end up on your tail. If the legs aren't balanced, if there's not balance between those three legs, then you'll be at least off balance, if not on your tail. And so a more concise way of putting that across is people and profit and planet. The whole idea of sustainability is a bit challenged in that there's a lot of it's a pretty dense concept, and things like people, profit, planet help to communicate it better. It's a really it's 6 syllables long. It's not the most exciting word. I've heard someone say that if somebody asked you how your marriage is going, and I said, well, it's sustainable. That's not what you're trying to get across. My wife's in the room, so I better not say that. So it's really about flourishing and quality of life over a long period of time. So there's a challenge in communicating it right off the bat. So I wanted to take a few minutes and just talk about some of the big picture issues that we're dealing with, sort of on a global scale. But I want to talk really about some of the interesting things that are happening here in Calgary. I think a lot of you have the handout sheet for action. We want to make sure we talk about those things as well. This is a population on this axis in time, and the big orange numbers are in the billions of people that we have on the planet. So we're now north of 7 billion people, and you can see obviously the speed that the next billion shows up is increasing over time. So 7 billion, and that curve is expected to keep driving. So the question from this UN report is, will my grandchildren live in a world of 10 billion people? So obviously when you have that many more people consuming, eating, producing waste, etc., it just puts that much more pressure on the global systems that we have. So something that's sort of an important overarching backdrop. Where that growth is happening, it's Asia and Africa. So you can see the really light yellow line there. That one's not as bad. But that's where the population action is happening, so to speak. The rest of the world is there's growth happening, but not nearly at the levels of magnitude. So obviously, that's no surprise, the amount of that's China and India and their population and development of their economies in the news. But again, another sort of piece of context when we're talking about our global environment. The issue of carrying capacity, I think, is worth spending a minute on as well. This is a concept used by ecologists, biologists, etc., that talk about the idea is that the maximum population of a given species that can survive indefinitely in a given environment. So at this scale that we're talking about, the given species is us, and the given environment is the globe. So to make sense of 7 billion people on a world that's pretty big, but actually pretty small in a lot of ways, the idea of carrying capacity is really, really important. I'll talk about how we're living, more of us are living in cities, and obviously our economies are more and more intertwined. But there's a couple of impacts that I wanted to just talk about, that through the trade and natural flows of ecological goods and services, urban regions, Calgary, Edmonton, Bangladesh, appropriate the carrying capacity of elsewheres, creating dependencies that may not be ecologically or geopolitically stable or secure. So, you know, the topic that we're all familiar with here in Alberta is the topic of energy and energy dependence and those kinds of things. And so that's just one example, but we'll talk about some others. And so the distancing effect of people living in cities and the increased trade has a couple of impacts. Urban regions import carrying capacity, so the population of any region can actually exceed what would be sort of their logical carrying capacity through trade, because we're taking resources from other parts of the world. And it's not just us, it's because of the interconnections of the economy. The second is that we export that degradation. So what we do here has impacts on the landscapes of China, for example, or Sri Lanka, because of the impacts of production and resource extraction and those kinds of things here. So the ecological footprint's defined as the area of productive land or water and water ecosystems required to produce resources that we consume and assimilate the waste that we produce, wherever that is in the world. So it starts to put all this, you know, how we live our lives in a uniform, measurable unit. So it talks about hectares. So how big is that? Roughly the inside of the field part of a track and field area. So that's 1 hectare. So this is from the City of Calgary's State of the Environment report from 2010. And these are ecological footprints around the world that year. So Canada is on the far left here in the gray, and it's just under 6 hectares per person. In the red is Calgary's. And the United Arab Emirates has the highest in the world, followed by the United States, Kuwait. So Calgary's ecological footprint is world-class, and not in a world-class way that we would maybe strive for. The world average you can see here, and you see places like China and all the way to a place like Haiti. So in terms of our impact, it's just a measure of impact on the things we produce, the waste we create, etc. So 8.59 hectares per capita was our footprint. And to put that into context, there's roughly 1.8 hectares per person available in the world. So if everybody lived like we do in Calgary, we'd need, you know, give or take 4 planets to live our life. We don't quite have the technology for that. So on average, we use the equivalent of 1.5 planets to provide the resources we use and absorb the waste. So we're getting kind of behind the capacity of the systems that we have available. So this is just a graphic kind of showing that, and with population trends, development that's happening, higher standards of living in places like China and India with the populations they have. By 2050, some estimates say that we'll need about 2.5 planets. So we need to figure out how to shift some of these systems so that doesn't happen. So it equals what they call ecological overshoot. We're overshooting the capacity of our systems, and over time that they start to degrade and are unable to provide the services that we need. So as mentioned, we actually have a local sustainability plan here in Calgary. This plan was done 2005 to 2006 over the course of 18 months. the kind of approach used to develop this. So when I worked at the City of Calgary, I was on the project team that helped develop this. And so you sort of had the three-legged stool. We used the five-legged stool, I guess. So you had economy, environment, and social. But then we also talked about systems, the built environment systems and the governance systems, so how we make decisions, how power is allocated in the city. And then in black are the human needs that these different systems exist to meet. So, the intent here was to look at these systems, but then again, how they're all interconnected. So over 18,000 citizens were involved in the process. At the time, it was the largest civic visioning process ever done in the world. And some of the things that are in this massive document are things like more transit, more density, of course, use less water, use less energy, which you expect in a sustainability plan. And I won't go into depth about it, but imaginecalgary.ca if you're interested. It's sort of a guiding document has been for the City of Calgary and a lot of organizations in town like Calgary Economic Development, the university, the Calgary Health Region before it came AHS, and a whole bunch of organizations. So I want to talk about a whole bunch of kind of different subject areas, I guess. In the class that I teach this semester, we had an assignment where each one of the students picked just one item in their home. And these are actually the items that the students chose. So we had 24 students in the class, and this was what they studied. So it was, are there more environmentally friendly alternatives to the product you chose? And where did it come from? So we got them to do that analysis. 24 household items traveled about 209,000 kilometers to get to Calgary. And that was an initial scan. So someone that did the computer, for example, there's a whole bunch of components that probably traveled a lot further than the final product. So to put that into context, that's about 8 times around the world, or over half the way to the moon for 24 product items. So again, when we're talking about these very specific things like this object or whatever, there's big systems at play that allow 24 items to travel half the way to the moon, and it's easy to make these purchases that have these kinds of impacts. So again, when you think about the energy required, where they came from, labor standards there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, does all this consumption make us happier? If us in the developed world, does it actually make us happier? And you may have seen this quote before from Robert Kennedy. There's a whole preamble about what gross national product actually measures, like cigarette sales and pollution and those kinds of things that pollute. So his quote is, "The gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit or our courage, our wisdom or our learning, our compassion or our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile." So interesting perspective on something that's reported all the time and reported as a very important thing. An article last year from the New Yorker did a review on a book by the former president of Harvard on happiness. And so there's this sort of growing study of happiness. So there's an economist out of Edmonton, Mark Anelski's his name. He's a classically trained economist, but thinks 180 degrees from classical economists. He wrote a book called The Economics of Happiness, which is a really fascinating read, and if you get a chance to see him speaking around the province, I'd highly recommend it. So this article talks about in the United States over the past 3.5 decades, per capita income has risen steadily in adjusted dollars there. In that time, the average home size grew by almost 50%. Number of cars increased by more than 120 million. But during that whole time, percentage of Americans since the early 70s reporting happiness has remained virtually unchanged, and the average level of self-reported happiness appears to have been flat since the 1950s, and that's pretty consistent across a lot of developed countries. So it appears that once a society hits a certain level of material well-being or affluence, that all this other stuff doesn't necessarily make us happier. So food, so this is where our taco tells us a few things. There's a design school in San Francisco a few years ago they wanted to understand where food came from. So they went down the street to the taco vendor on the corner, bought a taco for 99 cents. Started taking it apart, talking to the guy about where he sourced his materials. And this is the map of that 99-cent taco. So this is a map of what they call the taco shed, which I love that term. So it's tough to see the details, but it identifies, sort of color codes the different ingredients from the taco itself to the foil and those kinds of things. And this is where it all came from. This would be no surprise to people in our class that within a single taco, the ingredients had traveled a total of 64,000 miles, or just over 2.5 times the circumference of the Earth. We did the same kind of assignment in our class. We had a potluck, and so your challenge was to get your ingredients as closely sourced to Calgary as possible. And that was a real challenge for folks. We had the big challenge is spices. So we had one woman that had everything she needed to, it was meat tarts, I believe. And then she looked at where her salt came from, at least salt, and said, well, I can't do it. So she tried to use cheese to flavor it up and those kinds of things. So I think the winner was all the ingredients for locally sourced waffles was 500 kilometers for all the ingredients combined. And she called them, Kelly, what she called them? $65 waffles, because again, the cheap stuff was from all over the place, but the expensive stuff was more close to home. And the record was the 44,000 kilometer 3-bean salad. So cities, it's I think really important to talk about cities because over half of us now live in cities in the world. So that's never happened. In 2008, we tipped that scale. And by 2050, it's expected that 75% of the world's population will live in cities. So this is where the action is happening and where the solutions need to be found. This shows where the big cities are right now, over 1 million people. You see these, barely see these tiny little dots up here compared with the intensity of giant cities in Asia and Africa. This is a density map of what's happening in the world where people are living. And then this is a map that you can't see at all except for the blobs. The fastest growing cities in the world. So the only two that show up in North America are New York City and Mexico City. And then you see where things are really happening there. So again, this is in terms of impact on the global environment. This is where a lot of the battleground, so to speak, is going to be happening. So go back to the initial definition of sustainable development and about meeting needs. And cities and meeting needs have gone hand in hand for a long time. So if you think about the needs don't change, but how we meet them changes over time and the impacts of how we meet those needs. So if you look at Calgary, we've always had the need for recreation. So up top is, from what I've been told, is that's the intersection, around the intersection of 4th Ave and 4th Street downtown, so just where Chinatown starts. Apparently you met your need for recreation in the late 1800s by playing tennis in a suit. Who knew? Same need today, but we meet it in a different way, something like Millennium Skate Park. Transportation, getting around. So this image is from 100 years ago, and planners like to talk about mobility options. Well, there was lots of options in 1912 in Calgary. You could use your feet, you could drive a car, you could take a streetcar, you could take a horse and carriage, lots of options. Same need is met today, but we meet it in a different way, something like the CTrain, for example. And finally, same need we've always had for shelter. And this is, again, early Calgary. That was met in a very different way. This was, we met our need with wood buildings, which didn't get along with fire so well. So there's a fire starting, so that's why everyone had to run out of the buildings in this image. The other thing to think about is how communities or cities are built. It really lasts, literally over centuries. So the example I like to use is Barcelona. I had a fortunate chance to study there for a semester when I was doing my degree here at the University of Calgary. And so this is the original city of Barcelona in the dark there. So they wanted to create a plan for the expansion and growth of Barcelona in the mid-1800s. So this guy named Cerda created this grid plan, a nice even grid. His theory was that would result, if you have an equal grid, that will result in an more equal society. So there is lots of thought behind just what seems like a normal grid. So that was a plan from 1859, and this is Barcelona today. So 150 years ago, and this is exactly as we see it. Just another view on it. And so we talk, there's increasing density in the city. And so that makes people nervous. But to put some perspective on that, there's probably about 1,800 people per square kilometer in the city of Calgary, sort of across the city on average. In this community where I lived, it was 25,000 people per square kilometer. But besides the church, there wasn't a building over 6 stories high. So what that enables is we never once thought about the need to drive a car. We had everything we needed within 2 or 3 blocks. But again, this was Serta's plan 150 years ago, and that urban structure, the bones of the city aren't going to change anytime soon. So the importance of thinking long term is really important in cities. So get the decisions right. An interesting tool is a thing called Walk Score, where you can type in where you live, and it's got an algorithm built in there that gives you a score out of 100 of the walkability of your community. So you might be able to find some things in your neighborhood you weren't aware of, and if you're looking to buy a new place, this is something that might be of interest. And again, all the good benefits of if you walk as part of your daily routine, all the health benefits and community benefits that come with it. So I'm sure you all remember that Sunday afternoon when Crosby scored his goal and we won gold. Really interesting follow-up the following week. EPCOR released water usage in the city of Edmonton on that day. And this is what it shows. So the green indicates water usage on the Saturday, the day before. And the blue indicates water usage in the city of Edmonton. And the annotations are during the hockey game. So you can see, end of the first period, woo! Run to the bathroom. All right, back. Drink some more. Second period, go back. Third period, drink some more. Celebrate some more. Medal ceremony. Then it's over. Then you really got to go. But I think a really interesting snapshot of all these people didn't know that they were collectively having this impact on the system, right? So despite the fact that there's these big global things like global population, pollution, ecological footprints, we can all take action. If we do it all in a direction, it can have an impact. And just a simple way of putting it across, now look, we all do our bit. If we all don't do our bit, then the bit doesn't get done. So it's up to you and it's up to me. And I think that it's easy to kind of lose the plot and say, what's the point? So I'll just leave you with a quote from a guy that I'm reading to my daughter quite a bit, the Lorax. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. So that's kind of my closing message and my challenge to you folks. And thanks very much for listening to me ramble on for a long time.